Welcome back to Unlocking the Value of System Center and Azure Pack webinar series, co-hosted and presented with the registrar and delivered to you through the Microsoft Most Valuable Professional Programs for UK and Ireland. In this next module, Module 7, we're going to take a closer look at how we will utilize System Center to improve your management and service delivery through the functionalities of automation. My name is Damien Flynn. I'm a 5-year Microsoft MVP focused on cloud and data center technologies. I've been co-authoring 3 books so far on Microsoft technology stack, including Microsoft's private cloud computing with a focus and emphasis on the Microsoft cloud stack, including Virtual Machine Manager, App Controller, and the Hyper-V services. I've helped author the software-defined networking and functions within the Hyper-V installation and configuration guide, commonly known as the Bible. So please make sure you have a copy. And of course, the hot topic of the moment is virtualizing just about everything we can, and the network is no exception. So co-authoring with Nigel Kane and team on the building clouds. This covers the building a virtualized network solution, how and why with System Center Virtual Machine Manager, and we talk about Microsoft's network software installations. I'm available online at damienflynn.com. You can reach me an email with info@damienflynn, or of course follow me or tweet me at damienflynn. In this particular module, we're going to take a closer look at the actual automations. Back in Module 2, we talked about all of the different components that created service in the System Center environment. Those included System Center Orchestrator, that was the visual design platform, and then its newly introduced components as an of Service Pack 1 for System Center 2012, the Service Management Automation. This, a little under-known piece of code, has got one of the most fundamental changes in how we automate our environments. We're going to start the presentations and we're going to look at the existing easy-to-use Orchestrator environment. We're going to swing over to the live environment and look at and talk through Orchestrator, what it does, how it does it, and why. Why do we care about Orchestrator? We'll take a leave of absence from Orchestrator about 30 minutes into the session, and we'll talk a little bit about the alternatives. What comes next? How do things work in a cloud world? And then, leveraging that as an introduction, we'll take a closer look at System Center Service Management Automation. Now, even though I'm calling out just 2 products, we definitely are not going to sit at just 2 products over the next hour. We're going to look at what we've learned through all of the previous courses. Deploying System Center, you've already got the knowledge now from that particular module on how to actually install these components. We've provisioned your fabric within the data center using Virtual Machine Manager. So now we can actually take advantage of orchestration and automation to help us maintain or repeat those processes. We can take a look at the alerting and the monitoring that is coming from Operations Manager and make some decisions, and should we actually open tickets and how things might work in that environment. And then effectively leveraging the tickets that we may expose, how can we actually utilize those through the service management, automation, and other pending technologies? Or maybe we'll go the exact opposite way. How can we improve our service management experience and take a step further beyond what Paul illustrated and actually use the automation engines to make our life easier, or maybe to even enhance the base products? So many potentials, so many options. So let's get started. I'm going to start us off in the same runbook we looked at in Module 2 near the end of that session. And that runbook was a runbook designed to return back BitLocker information. Now, in that particular runbook, we actually took a very quick look at what the runbook does and its role in the world. I'm going to use this runbook to help set some expectations and some reasonings for why. And also I'm going to use this runbook to just show how easy it is to actually create runbooks of our own. So the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a quick look at the actual environment. We're in the design surface known as the Runbook Designer. The Runbook Designer is essentially where all of the activities that we're going to do in Orchestrator really happens. You can see quickly from the menu bar here, I can refresh the actual canvas. I can run the activities in the book that I'm currently working on. I can check out the book to make edits and check it back in. Now, I will highlight that checking in and checking out, or undoing checking out, basically removes the runbook from the ability of actually running in the environment. It is not a versioning based check-in and check-out. So effectively I cannot check out version 1, check in version 2 and keep version histories. This is a much flatter check-in check-out solution. If you do need to do versioning, then I suppose we could automate that process through the utilization of activities. And what better set of activities to use than maybe Team Foundation services? Because in Team Foundation services, we get exactly those type functionalities. I can create different types of effects. So we could go to the process of maybe automating something like Orchestrator itself. We have, for example, from the activities delivered on Codeplex, for free, we have essentially export runbook folders. I can take those folders, put them onto a file system, and then I can create another activity which will actually check in those activities into a proper version control system. So even though the inbox product doesn't actually give us true check-in, check-out with version histories, the activities that are available to us either in the base product or available through extension integration packs from the internet quickly will address those misconceptions of the product and allow us to add what we need, building essentially runbooks. For example, here, my System Center Orchestrator backup flows. But back to where we are. The other piece to look at is within each of these activity areas, we can see there are quite a lot of them. They're organized into drawers, and each drawer then has different sets of activities akin to the tasks that we would like to run. So for example, if I'm interested in something like Operations Manager, where Kevin talked a little bit earlier on about alerts, here I can actually keep an eye on alerts that are currently enabled and just get them, or I can actually create an activity that monitors. A monitoring activity is one that sits there waiting, patiently waiting for something to happen. And when that alert happens, Runbook triggers and the show begins. So there are two types of activities, and we're going to see that as we start moving. We're going to see activities that essentially will start with initialization and run through the flow once they're started. So in those cases, they will essentially need to be manually started or started through that API layer, what we talked about earlier as REST or OData. Or of course, we can have activities whose task is to monitor. Those tasks essentially will sit and they'll monitor for a point in time. That could be up here as a monitor for a date and time, like a schedule to happen. Or in this case, it could be monitoring for a specific alert to happen and then trigger off some things. Or even over in Service Manager, we can monitor to see if some type of change has happened on an object. And because we're looking at object levels, it means that that monitor can be triggered on a review or an incident or a problem. And giving us those abilities to make decisions that when we get to this place, I need to do this thing. Okay, so we've seen the list, and this by no means is a comprehensive list. We've just installed some of the activities that happen to be utilized through the collections of runbooks that are in my environment. There are many more, but we're going to start with the sample runbook today. And the sample runbook has just got 3 or 4 steps in it. I'm going to initialize, and that's generally always the first step. If we're not monitoring, we're going to do some sort of an initialization. The initialize basically tells the system that this is where we want to start and we're going to do something. Then through the idea of a pipeline or a link, we then follow a sequence of flows. So very basically, I'm going to start, going to run a process, going to send a notification that I've actually ran that process, and then I'm going to send an alert afterwards. Now, in this very basic scenario, we're not doing any error handling. So for example, if this script failed, we may actually want to do a different alert. We may decide that we're going to do a branch down and I want to actually alert the administrator to say that we tried to run this, but we've had a problem. Or we might actually decide that the right thing to do in this case is we may want to create an incident. So very quickly, let's make a change. I can check out these. I can come over to my service manager and I can say I want to create an incident based on a template. I'll drop that directly into my canvas, and then I will create a link to the incident piece. And then I can come into my incident, and on the properties of my incident, I can start filling in information. So the first question is, what's service management environment? Oh, I have none defined. So my very first task will be to define what service management environment or service manager that I will be connecting to. Those pieces of information are stored up here in the options. So every time we bring in a new integration pack, depending on that integration pack, it may need additional configuration. So here I can see my System Center Service Manager has the ability to make connections, because obviously we need the activity to connect to a Service Manager environment. Now I can do that by providing in information to my demo Service Manager. And in the server that it happens to be running on. And I can provide that as a fully qualified domain name. So I can do, in this case, the following server should hopefully get me organized. And then I'm going to provide some credentials, my own credentials in this case. Hopefully they will be enough to get me in. And I also have the ability to set some polling times and reconnect times. How long should I poll? So in a monitor scenario, that monitor will get an update every 10 seconds. And if I do disconnect because I had a network issue, how long should I wait before I retry? So again, 10 seconds seems to be fair. Those can be made faster or slower, but like all things that are polling related, modifying these will have an effect on your resources. So 10 seconds should generally be good. Now let's just see if I actually have this environment set up correctly or if we can proceed. So by clicking on the test connection, my orchestrator is trying to make a connection, and lo and behold, we have a successful handshake back to the service manager to say that we're good to go. So with no development skills, I have now hooked up my orchestrator to my service manager. So I'm going to say yes, thank you very much. And that information now happens to be saved and locked away for good. Now just think about what that would have meant if I was writing a PowerShell script, or worse, writing this in C# or some of these other development languages. As IT folk, that's probably never going to happen. PowerShell, yes, we'll get there, but C#? Seriously. Now let's right click here, head down to the properties, and this time if I click on my connections, I can now see my demo service manager connection is now available to me. And then the magic begins. So now I want to actually make some decisions on the type of classes. And here I can see the different types. So I'm going to say that I would like to have this particular type of an incident. And the template going to come back from Service Manager saying that I want a high priority incident. Now, in the high priority incident, I'm going to automatically fill in the impact and the urgency fields. But more importantly, I want to actually tell the ticket some stuff. So I can actually put in a description, and I could also turn around and say that I would like this particular ticket to have a particular client name associated to it, and of course a display name. So the display name, let's fill that one in first, and we can turn around and say the display name for this particular issue is BitLocker automation failed. A description might be I failed to get the BitLocker details as requested due to a processing error. Now, that's great to have in the ticket, but really doesn't tell me anything. This is where I have some added functions. So let's say that I would like to actually take the feedback that I've got from the script. So I can say, give me access to the published data. And in this particular case, I can see the activity that's before me. So I'll look at the reverse of the chain. I can find that the activity happened just before me was a run init script. And from there, I can actually find out some information. For example, the details. Put that in, and now I can see that as part of the description, the details of the error is going to actually show up. Now I can add more in here or less as I might decide, and I can do something similar. So for example, the client name in this case, I may decide that the client name is not actually going to be a human. The client name might actually be the email address of the guy that was actually trying to request the information. So here I'm changing the activity, not to the one that happened just before me, but the one that happened prior to that, the initialize. And from the initialization, I can see that I've got the computer name and the user ID, the guy that I'm going to inform of the BitLocker. So that's the ID that I'm actually going to put on my ticket. So now when I take a look at this and I create my ticket to tell me that I had a failure, I'm going to put a high priority ticket in for this particular user with the description of the text to say I failed to get the BitLocker details and a display name on the ticket saying BitLocker failed. That's it. Code is written and we now have error handling. Now the only problem here is that we actually haven't told the system that this only happens during case of an error. So to do that, all I'm going to do is I'm going to take that link and I'm going to actually customize this link. So if the run.init script returns a warning or a failure, then I want you to follow this link. And for best practices, in scenarios of warnings and failures, we'll use the beautiful color of red. And then when I check in the log, I can see that the .NET script flow, if I have a warning or a failure, will follow the red path and open a ticket. But if I look at the black path, which is my default path, assuming the .NET script runs successfully, we'll continue the rest of the process. Now that is about as complicated as it gets. That's what it means to do visual programming, and this is the power of Orchestrator. Now, what we're going to do next is we're going to just dump that particular work. So I'm going to simply undo the checkout. And instead, we're going to take a look at some more sophisticated tasks. So one of the other scenarios we talked about automating was the fact that actually I happen to have a lot of different runbooks. And if I look through my environment here, I can definitely say there is absolutely no shortage of different runbooks sitting under these folders. Now, one of the beauties of Service Manager Orchestrator is that we have folder structures in place to keep things organized. We can take our different runbooks and put them into special places. So if I look, for example, here at the runbook flows, I can see that in this particular case, I have a production System Center Orchestrator backup flow. And that production backup flow is based on a monitor. And that monitor tells me the name is to run a nightly based backup. Now I'm not sure I will believe that, so what I can do is I can take a quick peek by looking at the properties and I can see that every 8 hours. So it's not actually nightly at all. Name doesn't really reflect. It really is that once every 8 hours I want to run a backup. Now I can see the status down here because I can actually see a flow was run at 5 p.m. So I can have a clear idea of what's going to happen. And in this particular case, I actually call a new activity. And that activity is part of the runbook control activities, which essentially says invoke another runbook. So closer look at this particular runbook tells me that this runbook doesn't even wait for the next one to finish, but he quite simply just goes and he finds in the production System Center Orchestrator backup folder, there should be a runbook called Tier 1 Nightly Development Backups. That's the one I want you to run. And lo and behold, in that folder, there is another runbook. And here I can see that particular runbook. And just like the other one, these runbooks are built in small, very clear, and very defined processes. The first one is export the workbooks, and the second one is a check in the workflows to TFS. So we can clearly see without any development skills, we just need to think of a process as an IT person of what it is I want to do and how I want to do it, and then I can drag and drop. Very much like you would draw anything in Visio or any other service. Now, if we want to look a little bit deeper then, I can make an assumption, just looking at the folder structure here, that step 1, export development workflows, that must be related to this particular activity when I drew this. And then when I drew the second activity, I obviously made a folder and I put the other runbooks that might be related to the workflow check-in process. So by taking a quick peek just to make sure that my assumptions are correct, I'll look at the properties and I can see that export development workflows is indeed another flow. And this one I will wait till it's complete on, which really means that when I start this runbook, I want to initiate the export, but I want to wait. Don't proceed until that export is finished. And when that export is finished, then move on to the next step, which might be the check-in process. Now, as I look closer at the actual export process, then I can start taking a look at some of the procedures that are necessary. Now, in this particular case, I'm actually going to do some counts because I want to keep an eye on how many different runbooks I'm exporting. So to do that, I'm going to leverage this free orchestrator administration integration pack that's available on Codeplex. That's Scorch, scorch.codeplex.com. Codeplex is essentially an open source repository where many MVPs and other members of the community create this fantastic set of resources, but provide them essentially with their source code. So if you need to make modifications or edits to fix things, you're invited and encouraged to do exactly that. And if all you need to do is just consume them and use them, then that too is absolutely acceptable. And if you find that you found a problem, then report it back, and I'm pretty sure that there will be somebody sitting behind the seats waiting to just get that information and make the modifications as requested or suggested within good reason. Now, in this particular case, the activity is designed to essentially get a list of subfolders that are running on the environment and then count them. So here I've basically set up a counter saying put the counter to 0. Get me a list of all of the folders that I'm going to back up, and of course the folders in question are these orchestrator folders. Then I want you to count. So the results of this particular get subfolders is actually going to kick off multiple flows. So for every folder I get, the next set of steps are going to run. So I'm going to, for this scenario where there's probably 30 steps, this particular runbook is going to kick this one off 30 times with the name of each folder independently, and I'm going to use that to export the rest of the development flows. And I can see what that means when I expand here. I can see that there's another activity whose task really is to take the name of the workflow and the path that it's in, and then take the second activity that's part of this job, which essentially is to export that runbook to an actual folder. And again, I can check the properties and take a closer look at what's happening. Once that runbook has been exported, I can reduce my counter until that counter goes back to 0. When that counter goes back to 0, then I know all of my runbooks have been exported successfully, and I can move on to the next part of the process. So again, logic is really all that we need to think about here. From the perspective of what happens and how things happen, I'm making this whole idea of starting the flow, resetting my counter to 0, connecting to Orchestrator to find out what folders are in here that I want to back up. Then once he returns, he's going to come back with a list of 30, 40, 60, 1, depends on how you've designed your environment and how many folders is in it, but he'll come back with a list of all of those folders. We start counting upwards, or every folder we start processing. We then attempt to export it. And if I take a close look at this particular one, you'll notice we don't wait for completion. So the concept being that we can run these in parallel. I can have 30 exports running at the same time. Some of these folders will have lots of activities. Some of these folders will have 3 and 4 items in them, just as we've already seen. More activities means it takes a little bit longer to export. As those processes complete, then, as we've just seen in this particular point, we can bring that counter back. So this one is done. So now I'm back to 2, and then ultimately I'll make it my whole way back to 1. And the concept is that I'll wait till all exports are done, which essentially means my counter has made it back to 0. And we can check, is that what we're checking for? So check the counter. And the behavior of that counter is once that counter is back at 0, we can also take a look at the looping on this particular counter. So wait 60 seconds and check to see if our counters are back to 0. And when the counter is back to 0, then I can return back to the steps that was above me and then start the process of looking at TFS. And on TFS, then start the cycle to do the exact opposite. Take the workspace in TFS and take the files that we've just exported and start the process of actually checking those out for the old version and then replacing them with the new checked in version. In this particular case, we're making decisions saying that this particular runbook has never existed before, so we just do a check out, check in. Or if the runbook did exist, I'll check out the old one, copy in the new one over it, and then check it back into TFS. Quite simple logic when we think about it, and extremely easy for us to do version control without actually having to do version control. Because remember, this is happening automatically based on a schedule of every 8 hours. Now, as visual designers, this can get very complicated. We can start doing a lot of different types of things. For example, in this list, I have the concept of running management agents for things like FIM, so Forefront Identity Manager. So if I wanted to synchronize lots of different activities across different databases, or if I was to unlock the fact that we are using Office 365 and we need to do an Azure Active Directory synchronization, we might actually want to maintain that a lot more granular than we get from the basic product. In that particular case, I can use this integration pack known as the FIM integration pack, because FIM and Azure Active Directory Sync essentially are one and the same product, and I can use that to actually start and run management agents. Now, what that might actually look like is something to this effect, where I've got a runbook essentially coming in asking to take a job ID, so something for me to just track what I'm doing. But in FIM, I have the requirement to provide a management agent name and a profile. Now, what these might look like if I actually was to take a look at Azure AD, Azure AD Sync, or FIM, which is the real name for this engine, I can see the management agent. So for example, Lionbridge on Microsoft.com. So that's the management agent. And then I want to run that management agent and I can actually see the profiles. So there's 2 pieces of information required, the management agent name and the actual profile I'm going to execute. And that is exactly the same piece of information that I have here in my orchestrator, the agent name, the profile I'm going to run. And as I mentioned before, simply an ID for me to identify this in my database because I'm going to log it and I'm going to track every time I run these things. So with that information, I'm actually going to go ahead and update the log. And you can see I'm calling an activity whose task is simply to run an update log task. And I'm going to provide in information saying starting a run profile with the name of the run profile. We've done that before and we can take a closer look at it by doing an expansion here. And I can easily see that the run profile is information that we're taking from the initialized data with the name of the profile. And I'm also going to include the management agent. So I can programmatically, just using my mouse, quickly get information of very useful into the logs. Take the log ID, which make it easy for me to actually sort these things so that I can say that this is the job, and the job ID might be a timestamp or something to that effect. So I get a very fast method of going back, seeing what agent ran at these particular times or that job or what sequence numbers were being run. Then I get to use my new activity. So here again, I've got my Start Management Agent Run profile, which essentially is this particular activity. And when I take a closer look at what's happening under the hood, very similar to the one we looked at a little bit earlier on for Service Manager, we have to provide a connection to the FIM server. So in this particular case, it's a connection to our Azure Active Directory. And again, he only needs two pieces of information: the name of the agent, the name of the profile. And then he will sit and he will wait for those to finish. Now, just akin to what we done in the very first example where we're doing BitLocker, I've actually got the results sending me off in two different areas. So if the outputs of the run film profile runs success, then I would be happy enough to actually follow this piece. But make sure that in the success, that the status is equal to successful or completed with sync errors or completed with discovery errors. So these are different health statuses that we get when we run the actual profile. And I can see these here. If I click out of here, switch over as far as the operations, I can see the status. So success, success, success. And in this particular case, I had an error exporting. So completed export errors. Do I want to tell people that things were good when I see this message? Of course I don't, because something's obviously wrong. And here I can see there's a permission issue on this particular user. So most certainly I need to communicate that there's an issue. So back in my orchestration, I'm making a decision that if I see completed sync errors, then I had trouble. And if I had trouble, then I'm going to update my log, and I'm going to update the log with the message to say this profile failed to run, and this is the error code that we got back from FIM for that failure. So I have very, very simply written a very sophisticated procedure with error handling, logging, and automation without actually writing a single line of code. And this is the beauty of using something like Orchestrator, because Orchestrator allows us to do that cool scripting stuff that I'm not very good at scripting. Now, let's leave Orchestrator behind for a moment. Let's consider Service Manager. Because really, Orchestrator is all about making our life easier, and it doesn't have to be on just basic flows that I'm drawing out. Because we've thought about that a little bit a few moments ago when we leveraged Orchestrator to do versioning of our runbooks. But why not contemplate using Orchestrator to make the rest of our lives easy? Service Manager is designed as a tool to help automate people, IT process. I want a ticket, I need a ticket resolved, I got an engineer to resolve it. Happy days. Not really if you happen to be the engineer whose job is to create user accounts on a repetitive basis, or disable user accounts, or make mailboxes, or just do repetitive mundane tasks. After a while, your help desk team are going to be, well, not there because they simply want some challenges too. That's is where Orchestrator and Service Manager can start to become buddies. But let's think of the other way around. In Service Manager today, users create incidents through the portal. Log into the portal, push the button, fill in the information, and then the ticket or incident gets logged. Now, Service Manager actually doesn't just offer incidents, it offers service requests. And service requests are a little bit more special because they might be saying, please, can I have the BitLocker code for my server? Bright light should be going above your head right now, and you should be thinking, oh, that's right, we looked at a runbook that gets the BitLocker information. I can then save any human interaction, and I can have Service Manager take from the user the name of the computer we're interested in. But we actually talked about Service Manager being a CMDB. So I could go a step further. I know who the user is because by virtue of him logging into the portal, I have his identification. So I don't need to ask who. But I can take the information I've got from Configuration Manager and I can get a list of computers that this user is associated to him that happen to be BitLocker protected because Configuration Manager will get me that information. Now, when I offer the service request to the user, I can let him select to get the BitLocker keys for just his devices and just a subset of his devices that happen to be protected by BitLocker in a little drop-down list. So we can say, I would like to get my BitLocker keys off from the list of 2 or 3 machines that he may have BitLocker installed on. He selects the option he needs and then hits submit. Now in the old days, that would land in the queue in the help desk, and then the help desk guy would go and he would run the actual orchestration to actually get the BitLocker information because he didn't have the privileges in Active Directory. Why bother that help desk guy? Can't we just get Service Manager to call Orchestrator? After all, the 2 pieces of information that are relevant, the name of the user and the name of the machine, we've already determined that by communicating with the user. So let's skip the help desk guy and let's automate the process end to end. And as the results of the ticket come back, we can return that back into the actual request so the experience stays firmly and totally within that user self-service experience. Now we're starting to think about what service management and automation together can deliver us. Let's take a look at that. But before we do, we started this discussion on the concepts of the user needs to communicate through a portal in order to open an incident. We also looked at the very start with this whole concept of connectors. And in the case of Operations Manager, we know Operations Manager has this configuration information. We talked about that back in Module 2, where we get the information about what machines are part of our business services, or the business service for mail, then I need to know all my mail machines. And that configuration detail we've got over from the Operations Manager guy. So Service Manager has the intelligence. But we also know Operations Manager's job is to keep an eye on the operations. Is it up? Is it down? Are there alerts? So I could, of course, use a connector to Operations Manager for alerts. And in this connector, I can provide information to generate instance from an Operations Manager alert. I can define the template. And remember, we looked at templates when we built that special handling for the BitLocker function that didn't work, and I wanted to create a high importance incident. Well, it's the same templates. We're now basically going to say if we get an alert from Operations Manager, how do we want to template this? Should I do it high importance, low importance? Maybe it's determined. Maybe I need Orchestrator to help me make that decision. Set the resolution. How often should we check Operations Manager? You get the idea. Running through a simple wizard, we can just say I want my SCOM alerts. I can provide some details about the actual SCOM servers that I'm going to connect to. I can actually pick some permissions that we'll utilize for actually connecting to it. So I probably can use the same permissions that the connector is using. I could do something like Bill System Center Service Manager, Operations Manager Management Server Node 1. And I can test to see if those privileges are fine. If they are, I'm going to get a box back saying, we're good, we can keep going. If I can keep going, then I get to make some decisions. What am I going to do? I need a set of rules. So my first rule is AD, Active Directory stuff. I want those to go to, well, they're not hardware. Obviously, that's going to be high importance incidents. It's Active Directory after all. The Operations Manager pack that contains the rules or monitors that we're going to be actually alerting on has to be equal to Active Directory, or whatever the actual name of the actual management pack is. Or maybe it's not the management pack, maybe it's a computer. If the computer is a member of a group, or maybe I've got a custom field set up on the operations manager side. You get the idea here that I can start building filters. But more importantly, I can now get service manager getting information directly from operations manager through automation. But there's another scenario. How about the email? A user wants to send me an email to support@mycompany.com. Out of the box, Service Manager actually doesn't have a connector to email. That's a bit odd. Create a connector, and there is no connector to email. Now, Microsoft have actually seen the light, and there is actually a connector available to communicate with Exchange. But what happens if your mail system isn't Exchange? That's a good point. Well, it doesn't take a genius to figure out. We could always probably go and take a look at Orchestrator. And in Orchestrator, in this demonstration, I'm going to show you a mail connector. And the concept on the mail connector, well, the picture says 1,000 words. I'm going to monitor a mailbox. And again, I have a connection, which is based on the configuration. And the configuration is, in this case, called my Service Manager mailbox. And if I wanted to see how the configuration was, I go back up to my options. But this configuration is basically saying keep a nook on the inbox every 60 seconds and pull in the plain text body of any mails that haven't been read. So now I'm pulling a mailbox every 60 seconds. And then based on that, I'm going to determine, is there a work item ID? So I've got a small little bit of PowerShell sitting in here. And if I expand this text, I can see what exactly is this PowerShell supposed to be doing. And this PowerShell is going to check the subject of the mail to determine if this is an update or a new ticket. In the event if it's an update, we'll extract the ticket type and ID. In the event if it's a new ticket, then, well, we'll just have to indicate that's the case. So we use the subject that we've just pulled in from the new mail. And then using regular expression, I'm going to see if there is a ticket ID in the subject. So it might be IR or RA or SR or some of these different things. So IR would be an incident, and SR will be a service, and MA will be manual activity, and RA will be review activities. So using very simple anagrams in the subjects, we can quickly determine if this mail happens to be a thread for a particular ticket that's been ongoing, or if there's none of these letters stuck in this particular format, this expression essentially in the subject, then this must be a brand new ticket. So now I've got enough knowledge worked out in that little bit of PowerShell to make a decision on what I'm going to do. Then I can format the actual mails and I can make the decisions based on the information I've gathered if this is going to be an update to an existing work item or if I need to create a new work item. In the event that I'm creating a new one, then I'm going to run the create work items. Did I have a problem with that? If I have a problem, then I might want to actually take that mail out of the inbox, mark it as read, but move it into a folder in the inbox. And I can see that happening here. So I want to move it to a folder saying no ticket was created for this particular mail. So it becomes very easy for me to actually do some checks and balances to make sure that my mail environment is working fine. Or in a similar scenario, if I was able to actually create the ticket, but I had a problem actually parsing the identifier, the number that was in it, it was garbage or it was a duplicate or something like that, then maybe I want to put that into a folder saying there's something wrong here, come back and check. And of course I can send an alert or make another ticket, or do other handlings to say, help desk guys, we've just had a failure on mail processing. Go check the mailbox that people are delivering mail to, my support mailbox. And if there's attachments associated to those, then I probably want to process those as well. So here I can actually see I have a runbook whose job essentially is to create a folder on the file system. And the folder on the file system, well, maybe you want to call that folder to match the work item ID. And then I'm going to pull the attachments out of the email that I've got in. If there are no attachments, then obviously just delete the folder and give up. There's no attachments. If there are attachments, though, I'm going to retrieve all of the attachments from the mail using another activity from my collection. So I'm going to take the email ID, for the mail I'm working on. I'm going to dump all of the attachments into that particular folder I just created. And then I'm going to go through the process of uploading those attachments into my incident. I'm going to wait until I've got all of my attachments uploaded. So again, sequential processing, and we can see that we don't wait. So if I look at the properties of this fella, I can see I'm going to wait to make sure he's all of those done. And then once they're all uploaded, delete the folder from the file system. So another health check at the end of this cycle turns around and tells me that if there's folders left in this particular file system location, then something went wrong with the attachment process. If there are no folders and the runbooks are no longer running and things are nice and stable, then it's obviously been a success and there's no side effects. And it becomes easy for me in this scenario then to figure out that, well, you know what, I had a problem attaching attachments to incident request number 44. It's very easy for us as a help desk team or a support team to figure out what's happening. And I've written this connector. I've written this connector in basic, simple, supportable English. It's a graphic. It's easy to see what's happening. So now I've enhanced the ability for Service Manager to be able to process mail, but I can do some smarter things. Let's say, for example, the subject has some other pieces of information in it. If the subject happens to have, for example, the letters corporate IT in it, then I can actually tag the ticket that I created and mark it to be sent to the corporate IT team. So now, because I have gone through that process of essentially building the mail connector, I can do advanced stuff on it. I can figure out that if that mail came from the CIO, man, I don't want that going to helpdesk level 1. That ticket goes directly to me. I can check the flow of the mail, I can check the sender, and then I can update the object to reflect that change as necessary. So now we've got an existing choice of having Service Manager leverage Orchestrator to do work for it, or in this case, we can have Orchestrator leverage Service Manager and have it tell Service Manager to do something. So the reverse psychologies are coming in. And we can go another step. We can talk to Service Manager and Orchestrator, and we can actually get these things to essentially work together. So for example, let's say we've got tickets coming in and out through the environment, and those tickets need to be processed. In the background, for Service Manager to do its job, it needs to actually process workflows. As a ticket gets updated or resolved, somebody might get notified. So we can easily have Orchestrator sit and watch and see if a ticket has had new comments put onto it. So for example, here analysis puts a comment on the ticket. Then I can grab information about the ticket. So sit monitoring the ticket log for an analyst's comment. Grab the ticket ID and the ticket information and figure out was that comment ticked to be private or not. And if the information was ticked to be private, then maybe I don't need to do anything else because the next analyst will see it. But if it was ticked to be public, then maybe I want to actually notify the analysts and let them know that there was an update put there. So I can make some decisions again. I can also figure out that who requested this. This has come from a user that happens to be internal to my organization. Or was he external? And in which case I might want to use a special mail template to say that this is an external customer, so he's going to get different privileges and different communications. So we again have the ability to modify the behaviorisms that are happening inside Service Manager. We can also enhance Service Manager. So for example, when we close a ticket, that ticket basically will sit there. Now I can monitor on a schedule, and any ticket that happens to be 14 days resolved and no additional updates on it, then go and update that ticket and mark it to be closed. So change that incident to status closed. So again, taking business services and reinventing how we utilize our service management really and truly gives us a new way of doing things. Now, let's switch back one more time to Service Manager and we will take a quick look at the library. And under the library, I have the concept of publishing a service offering. So we'll go back one final time and we'll think about our BitLocker scenario and how that might actually work. So we potentially would offer something to the self-service user. So in this case, maybe we can imagine something in the cloud happens to say, give me my BitLocker ID. Now, what does that really look like in this environment? In this environment, I get essentially an offering, and that offering is based on an actual request. So as I scroll down here, I can see that I have a request. Now, the request in this particular case is published, but this request needs information, and I can prompt the user for fields in the form. Please give me the following information. Give me the title for your error, description for your issues, see if there's an alternative methodology for me to contact you, and if you have any attachments you'd like me to be aware of. But more importantly, then I can start defining how I want that information provided. This must be a string, this must be formatted, and I can use regular expression to make sure that the guys are actually providing correct information. And then I can map that prompt. Now, all of this information essentially gets associated back as far as essentially the work item. And that template allows us to make decisions to pass information over to the runbooks. So sitting right here, I can see that I have a connection, get my BitLocker information runbooks coming from the runbook server for one BitLocker information. And if I come over here, I can see for one BitLocker information. So I can see, get me the name of the runbook that's just gone through, what's the service request, get the computer, find out the BitLocker information, and then finally, let's take a look at it. We're going to put the BitLocker information, and we're going to put the information back into the ticket. So the information that we necessarily need to tell the user at the end of his request is there and available to us. Now, let's stop for a few moments and let's recap. What we've looked at so far is Orchestrator and how it comes into our life, how it makes our life easy, how it can enhance or be enhanced. But we also mentioned that Orchestrator is going to change. And Orchestrator is going to change for the better. And it's in transition and has been in transition since the Service Pack 1 version of System Center was released. And this transition is going to complete quite shortly as we move forward into the next era of System Center. The engine that drives our Orchestrator today is a bespoke engine that has been around for a number of years and isn't fully aware or ready to embrace the full world of 64-bit. It doesn't have all of the benefits of PowerShell, and there are a number of additional bells and whistles like resumability, scalability, and so on and so forth that challenge the orchestration environment, especially as you start to adopt it into much larger configurations. PowerShell, on the other hand, has embraced for the last number of years the concept of workflows. And service management automation is going to take that to the next level. Service management automation enables us to effectively have an engine to store and run all of our PowerShell scripts and modules in one single unified place. Now, this one is very important, but it also has a learning curve. Because the learning curve straight off is this today does not include a visual designer. And this is why it is packaged with Orchestrator, because today these two tools are at different parts of their life. Orchestrator is the tool of choice. It is the tool we will continue to use and will continue to use for the next year or more, and probably beyond that as people still make huge investments in that tool. But the tool coming after Orchestrator is service management automation. It is the PowerShell engine behind. And those of you that are comfortable with writing PowerShell scripts, this is the tool you need to start using now. Those of you that are not ready to write PowerShell, then the first obvious one is get ready, because PowerShell is here to stay. But you can also hold off a little bit because service management automation is still maturing. And its next phase is to get a graphic designer. And as it gets its graphic designer, it will start to expose the same experiences that Orchestrator has today and become essentially the next Orchestrator. So really what Microsoft are doing is they're exposing to us the new next generation engine without all of the bells and whistles of graphic design ability, but exposing to us the features that they have already enhanced into the Runbook engines and the back end of the services for sustainability, manageability, and resumability. Wow. Those are things we can embrace today. And let's take a little look at what those might look like in our environment. So, where better to start than good old PowerShell? And yes, this definitely doesn't look the same as the video drawings that we've just watched through Orchestrator for the last 30 minutes. This is real, true and true PowerShell. And with the benefit of some color coding, we can at least make some idea of what's happening here. And in this particular case, we're looking at a function written in PowerShell whose task is to take an Exchange email user object and convert it to an email mailbox object, but restrict its access. And to do that, the flow is essentially the same thing. I need to make a connection to an Exchange server, so get a list of Exchange servers and attempt to make a session with it. Loop through them till I get a session, and if I fail to get a session by the time I finish looping, then it's time to throw an exception and say we can't go any further. If I do succeed, then I'm going to import that session and allow myself to start utilizing the Exchange commands. And the first thing I'll do is I'm going to get a list of mailbox servers. Once I've determined my mailbox servers, I'm going to find the database on those mailbox servers that matched my criteria. And then from that list, I'm going to pick one of those mailbox databases randomly. Assign that mailbox database to say this is where I'm going to place my new mailbox enabled user. Now to do that, I'm simply going to first check what the external email address happens to be on my mail user, because I'm going to want to retain that. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to enable the mailbox for that user in the database that I randomly chose on my servers. And then once I'm happy that that has been completed, I'm going to go ahead and put an inbox rule, so a mailbox rule, on this user's mail, so that any messages that are received to this mailbox, I actually forward them off, just like I would if I was using a mail user, to an external address, deleting the message from the mailbox and not processing anything after this. So essentially giving me the exact same experience as if I was a mail user. The only difference is that I have a mailbox. And just to make sure that the user doesn't start messing with my mailbox, I'm going to go one step further. I'm going to set the client access on the mailbox to disable active sync, MAPI, POP, and any other type of connection that you possibly think about. And at the end of that, the real reason for me doing this is because I wanted to enable unified messaging, because I can't do that on a mail user. I need to do that on a mailbox. So now that I've configured his mailbox, restricted him from using anything, automatically forwarding any messages out of that mailbox back to his external address, I can go ahead now and actually turn on the unified messaging and essentially finish my process. Now this is nothing unusual. It is a very simple script written in PowerShell, very similar to everything and anything you guys would have done before. But look at the top of my editor. I have lots and lots and lots and lots of scripts, and I'm going to have lots of versions of scripts, and I'm going to have scripts all over the place. And there will be an edit of it that will work great for me, but it won't work for the help desk guy, and this help desk guy is created, but something has changed. And we have version control nightmare. We have location nightmare. We have nowhere to schedule and run these things from. This is why we want service management automation. Now, what we're looking at is Windows Azure Pack. And we talked about this way back when we started in Module 2. And as we keep going, we're going to look at this even more in the next module as Gordon walks through the whole concepts of using Azure Pack. But for us to leverage service management automation, we do need some level of an interface. And this HTML5 interface is exactly the one that we're going to be utilizing to talk to service management automation. It looks and it feels like the existing Azure portal. And in this case, we're going to be looking at the pivot that is automation. Now let's think about that presentation that we done a few moments ago for the Runbook that happens to be responsible for creating my special exchange mailbox. So in this particular case, I've actually gone ahead and I've actually created and published this same Runbook in the service management automation. But one of the things I get to see straight away is I get to see some performance information. I can see how many times this particular runbook has been ran. Is it currently running? Has it been suspended? How many of them completed? And here I can see in this particular graph, I've got 2 runbooks currently suspended. And I can actually see them here in the actual job history as well. So by coming down here and clicking on the runbook, I can figure out what happened, and I can see that there's a problem with this particular one because the WinRM client had a problem with it. And I say, okay, that's fine. I know what that bug is. I can go and I can fix that. And I'll tell it to stop that job. I can then come back to the interface, take a closer look, and I can find out that I happen to have another one that's suspended, which I'd also like to stop. So that's fine. The user interfaces gives me a lot of really good contextual information straight off the patch. But more importantly, I now have a central location to keep all of my PowerShell scripts. And these PowerShell scripts I can author right here in the environment. Now, very similar to Orchestrator, we have that check-in, check-out, but in this case it's called published or drafts. Now, if I look at it in a draft mode, I can put it into edit, and then I can start taking a look at the code I've put in here, and if we look carefully, the process is almost exactly the same. I pop into the main piece, I try and make a connection to my Exchange servers, import the module, figure out the mail servers I want to communicate with, figure out what databases exist on that mail server, find out what the external email address was for the user, make his mailbox, set the rule to send the mail to his external email address, and then lock down his mailbox. Now things are slightly different because when we done the demonstration the first time, we looked at what was a Windows function. When we talk about doing things in service management automation, we do things in workflow. We use the PowerShell workflow engine to help us. And this workflow engine provides us with a lot of power because it means I can suspend just like you've seen. I can resume. I can have multiple servers load balancing actively in the background. I can have servers pause and take the runbook and pass them over to the next server and resume that load during a patching cycle. There are so many of these additional benefits that we start to get when we start using service management automation. But service management automation, even though it's powered through script rather than graphic in its current iteration, it is still very, very powerful when I start thinking about what it is I can utilize this thing for. If I switch back to the main view of my automation server here, for example, in our orchestrator scenario earlier, we talked about monitoring to see if something has happened on Service Manager that would initiate a ticket to be created, a support group to be changed. Here I can see exactly the same type of activities happening over in my orchestrator environment. But more importantly, what I can't see in the orchestrator that I can see right here out of the box is that I can see that on a certain date in March, there was no less than 96 support group changes done. I can see a few days later we had 65, and I can see the average suspended one over the last month is there have been 4, and these are the 4 of them, that all died somewhere in the middle of February. I can take a closer look at what happened to those particular ones, and I can see the work items here that had a challenge. And in this particular case, I can see there was something wrong with some sort of a duplicate key in it. And then I can come back, take a closer look at the incident that was causing me the problem and clean it up or resume it and get it fixed. The benefits that we start leveraging from service management automation are innumerable. We can also use this thing for kicking off specific processes. So for example, these ones all starting essentially with Service Manager or waiting for Service Manager to do something for us. I also have the exact opposite. I need somebody to run something. I want to actually post an order test every 30 minutes. I can come in here, I can take a look at this particular runbook and I can figure out how often it's run, if it runs successfully, has been suspended, and I can see quite clearly that I've had one copy of it suspended since sometime in February. But I can also see that I've had a queue of up to 12, but on average I'm running about 10 of these things. And then I can see that these are actually scheduled and the schedules of when they will run. So again, think about all of these different versions of scripts that I've got all over the place. And I need somebody to pull them together, keep them in a single place, keep them versioned. But more importantly, I'd also like to be able to make it easy for somebody to use them. By virtue of having a service manager, I can collect that information. And just like we were pushing through Orchestrator, I can push it straight to Service Manager and have Service Management Automation run the scripts. So you get the benefit of the technologies that are automation. Doesn't matter the engine if it happens to be Service Management Automation or Orchestrator. You make the decision of where your skill sets are. So if you're focused on PowerShell with Service Management Automation, if you're focused on graphic design, then you focus over in the land of Orchestrator for now. That essentially brings us to effectively the climax of what we've been looking at in the automation world. The flexibility that you get to influence how your business runs is absolutely boundless and bound only by you as an administrator and by your team in what they can think about doing and moving over. Starting with Orchestrator is a fantastic method to start thinking in a logical fashion of what would the flows be of doing things and get you into a mind of programming. And then moving over to service management automation as you evolve as developers and understand your coding and your PowerShell skills and allow you to start taking advantages that are offered today in the service management automation and also get you your first true glimpse of using the new Windows Azure Pack portal. There is so much to learn, so we're not finished. In the next session, Gordon's going to take you through the Windows automation features, the cloud features, and lots of other features that happen to be hidden in that Windows Azure Pack portal. So make sure you tune back in and join Gordon on his session. For now, though, I want to say thank you. My name is Damien Flynn, and on behalf of the Register and the Microsoft MVP UK and Ireland Group, and of course, all of us as MVPs in the Cloud and Data Center, thank you very much for listening to us. I hope this session on orchestration and automation has helped you just think of some of the new things you can do. And if you've seen something that sparks your interest and you'd like to learn more, please do reach out to me on Twitter, www.damienflynn.com on the blog, or of course drop me an email at your convenience. Have a great day and thank you very much.